Is it true on the inside that what I called the non-economic advisors who told the president to slip in a couple of lines on this in that speech that we saw, they never did run that past their economic people, did they?
This all developed at a White House breakfast last Tuesday where Ken Duberstein, a former White House staff director, suggested to the president and John Sununu that he ought to attack the credit card companies because it would be a cheap, easy, low-cost way to score a few points with the public.
Mr. Dieterich, you're usually, I think, a little more supportive of the Washington establishment. Do you think they went wrong on this one?
Oh, I think so. I don't know if I'd call the White House hysterical. I think it's a little early to be hysterical. I think they're now in a campaign mode. The campaign has begun. And when the campaign begins, you look around to do some things that will appear to be politically attractive. That was one. But hysteria, I think, David, that waits a while until
we'll schedule that a little later, right?
A little later in 1992.
So that what I'm hearing you say is that at this time, we can't just sit here and have a nice, pure economics discussion. We have to talk about the politics of this thing as well, right?
Well, yes, but believe me, I never knew a discussion in Washington that wasn't political in the end anyway, and I don't complain about that. After all, that's what governments are all about.
Right.
Economics is just part of the input, and it's usually not a very important part.
Mr. Eisner, a lot of the press has suggested that the subsequent 120-point drop of the markets following the D'Amato legislation that was passed by the Senate was in response. It was the market saying no to this credit card cap. I'm told that you think there's a little more to it. Is that right?
Well, I'm never one to really know exactly what and when goes on in the market, and I doubt that anybody else does. I don't know if all the experts have said that the drop came because of the credit card fiasco would have said that the moment it was announced and predicted that. It's easy to explain afterward. The market is obviously nervous, and I think it's nervous for good reason. The economy is in the doldrums, and people are uncertain what the administration is going to do about it. They've been counting for a long time on easier money to raise bond prices and generally stimulate the market and perhaps stimulate the economy. And interest rates have gone down with bond prices going up, probably more in response to the slow economy than to any really adequate active intervention. So the market is worried, and unless the economy gets out of the doldrums, there'll be all kinds of things like this that can shock people and say, well, maybe this is the time to beat the crowd and get out.
All right, now, what I'd like to do, and I'll start with John Skorberg from a local perspective, but I would like a kind of report card from you on the economy from any, I mean, you can make it national, international, local, whatever you want, but remembering that the president is saying that there are many fundamentals out there that are reasonably good, and that there's some things that aren't working with this economy. But some of it, there's a fight apparently going on. It may not be hysteria, but there is a battle going on in the administration, and one of the voices is saying, don't tamper with it too much, and another voice is saying, come on, get off your duff and really do something, George. Now, if you were to report to the president from the Chicago perspective, say from the retail holiday perspective coming up, what would your report card on the economy be?
Well, I can sort of see why they're divided, because the way I try to put it is, I think statistically, we are in a moderate recovery, but emotionally we're probably still in recession. So I think those are the two things that are pulling at the White House right now.
And why are we emotionally in a recession if statistically we're in better shape?
Because the normal person on the street, if I go up to them and say, good news, real GNP was up 2.5% in the third quarter, that's not going to mean anything to them.
Does it mean more that they had picked up the Tribune that day and seen that 2,000 AT&T workers were laid off and they're wondering, am I next?
Exactly. Or if they look at the unemployment rate in the state of Illinois, which is over 7% for the last 3 months, they look at that and they emotionally don't feel as good as the economy really should tell them that they should. But one of the problems with the unemployment rate is it's a lagging indicator, and it's usually one of the last things to turn down. Now, looking at the Chicago area, we have reason to feel a little bit better here in Chicago because most of the indicators that we watch show that Chicago has weathered this recession better than what's been going on with the rest of the nation.
But what if you looked at retail? In other words, what if the president says, well, are they doing any Christmas shopping yet there at Bloomingdale's?
In Chicago, yes. In the rest of the nation, no. We've got numbers that would show us 3 months ending in September, the nation up about 1.5%, which is not a good number at all. Chicago up a little bit more than 3%. So if you assume that inflation is running 2.5% for retail type goods, we're down unit-wise for the nation, but up here in Chicago.
David Hale, if the president called you and said, I want your opinion on, I want to know I want a good, concise snapshot of the economy before I go back and hear these debates from my advisors, what would you tell him?
Well, the politics are, I think, very simple. We've had a protracted period of sluggish growth now going since the end of the Reagan administration after 8 years of unbroken growth. That was an essential price to keep inflation under control and to begin to correct some of our big external deficits. And now this recession is technically over, but it appears it'll be a very subdued recovery. We have big tax increases going on at the state and local level. The federal tax share of GMP is still creeping upward. And therefore, unless we have a conscious policy change in January, tax cuts for the middle class, maybe an investment tax credit for business, it'll be continuing in 1992 at a very subdued, gradual pace by any historical standard.
Stop right there, because any politician by now his eyes would start glazing over. Politicians only want to hear economists for about 30 seconds. And
here on Chicago Tonight, we have a 45-second tolerance, so we really are at the borderline. Mr. Eisner, what would you tell the president in terms of what you think the reality of the economy is?
I think the reality is we don't know exactly where the economy is going, and I'm tempted to quote again John Kenneth Galbraith, who said, economists ask when we're getting out of the recession fall into two groups, those who don't know and those who don't know they don't know. And I'll quickly say that I don't know. I know I don't know. The economy is in the doldrums. If you point to a 2.4% rate of growth of GMP in the last quarter annual rates, that's no contradiction of the fact that most people are not feeling better off, they're feeling worse off. That's a very trivial rate of growth of 6% of 0.6% for 3 months. That's about as fast as the population is growing, and who knows where that GMP growth is.
And a possibility of no growth in the fourth quarter, right?
Possibility of no growth. So I would tell the president as an economist, because that's my belief, I think this kind of unemployment and sluggishness is intolerable. It involves tremendous losses to the economy as a whole, as well as to the people suffering, and I do something about it. As a politician, I'd have to say that, apparently the record is if the economy is moving up a few months before the election, you're in good shape, no matter where it's been before. So some of his advisors are probably telling, but I don't think they really know, that, well, play it cool, and by a few months before election, it'll be moving up. That may be good politics. I think it's irresponsible with the economy.
We'll get back to what should be done, but I want one last report card to the president on what the reality is dealing with, or we are dealing with.
The reality is that the recovery has gone from subdued to sluggish to stagnant and threatens to become slipping. 4 S's. And that's the case right now.
Why is that?
Why has it happened?
Yes.
Basically because we have a great outgoing riptide from the 1980s excesses. And the cyclical forces, the cyclical recovery forces are battling against that, and they're not strong enough. In other words, the secular forces are still quite negative. And we haven't done enough yet to bring down interest rates to successfully battle those outgoing negative forces.
You're saying these 5 drops in the discount rate are not enough yet?
Not enough. Well, the evidence suggests they're not enough. That is not meant as criticism, because, as Bob says, nobody knows what it takes to get the economy moving again. All they can do is try. But the answer obviously is they haven't done enough yet.
Let's
do more.
Let's go to the do more side. What do you say to those who say that under these circumstances, that interest rate drop is not enough, that money supply increase is a critical part that's missing, that you've got modest increases in money supply when you need a more vigorous increase in money supply? Anything to that?
I'd say then interest rates should drop further. There's nothing that says that we have used up our ammunition. The federal funds rate, that's the rate that it costs for overnight borrowings, is still 4 3/4%. There's a lot of downside room. So if there are barriers, and there are, we're suffering a credit blockage, we're suffering the other payments for other excesses, then we have to lower rates more than we otherwise would have. But I would do that before I would leap into one of Bob's stimulative fiscal programs.
Or would you do that before you leapt into anything in the way of a major tax cut?
Oh, yes, I would wait a little longer. And that's really what they're doing in the White House. They're saying, give us a little bit more time, get Congress home for Christmas, get this thing off the front pages, give us a couple of months, then we'll make up our minds whether we need to do more. But we don't want to do it now, because if we do it now, we may find that we opened a Pandora's box that we wish we hadn't.